Again, first slide, please. Good evening, everyone. My name is Neely Kelly. I'm based in Rochester. I'm the Community Relations Program Manager for AES Clean Energy in New York. And welcome to the Empire Solar Virtual Community Meeting. We are very grateful you have taken the time out of your days to join us. Next slide, please. A few housekeeping items. The meeting will last 1 hour. Please submit any questions you have in the Zoom Q&A feature. If you can't access the Q&A feature if you're on the phone, for example, please submit questions via email to empiresolar@aes.com. We will be monitoring that email address throughout the presentation. We also have the live transcript feature. There should be a blue arrow at the bottom of your slide to view the closed captions. The green arrow is the Q&A feature. We are recording this meeting and it will be made available on the project website along with the presentation slides and a transcript of the Q&A. Next slide, please. The purpose of today's virtual community meeting is to introduce AES to the community, present project information and updates, provide information on the New York State 94C permitting process, inform the community about next steps in the project development and how you can get involved, and to fulfill the public engagement component of 94C. Due to the persisting COVID crisis, AES is unable to hold an in-person community meeting for the safety of our team and the local community. We look forward to engaging with you in person when it is safe to do so. I will also add that at the end of this, at the end of the meeting, we will have a form, a feedback form, and invite you to fill it out and share any feedback about how we did tonight. Next slide, please. Here is your panelists and presenters for the evening. And now I will turn it over to Mike Farrell. Mike.
Thanks, Neely. Hi, everyone. It's nice to virtually meet everyone and certainly look forward to the time when we can meet in person out at the Empire Project. Quickly about myself, I lead the development for our projects in New York and really excited about this project that was acquired from National Grid, and I'll get into some details about that in a second. The agenda for today's call, we're going to talk about AES. I think there's been some name changes over a period of time. We'll kind of talk through that. Talk about the solar project, the overview of that, the New York State regulatory overview, including 94C, community interest topics, study updates, and then a Q&A. And as Neely mentioned, you obviously can submit questions as we're going through the presentation. Next slide, please. So a little stepping back about how we kind of got here with AES. So previously, originally this project was being developed by a company called Geronimo. Geronimo was acquired by National Grid. National Grid then changed the name to National Grid Renewables. At that point, S-Power acquired the project from National Grid Renewables. S-Power was previously owned 50% by AES and 50% by Alberta Investment Management Corporation. In late 2020, AES increased their ownership percentage, and as a result, S-Power was formally merged into AES. So now the project, we've gone through a lot of acronyms. The project is now owned by AES, and we keep the same team, and we also have had the benefit of having the original developers on the team join the AES team so that we can continue development of the project. And it does not impact the timeline of the project or the development. It's generally a positive as we move forward. Next slide, please. About AES. AES Corporation is a publicly listed multinational power company. You can see some stats here. Mission of the company: we want to accelerate the future of energy together and really believe in pushing renewable and clean energy. Operates in a number of different continents and countries. It employs about over 8,000 people. I should note it's one of the only multinational energy company that is actually headquartered in the United States. Next slide, please. AES Clean Energy is a business unit within AES Corporation, and that's where all those of us on this call and where this project lies. AES, it's about approximately 500 employees, and it operates across the United States using those diagrams on the left stand for solar, then wind, and then battery storage. So a significant operating portfolio and a much more significant even development portfolio across the U.S. In New York, we've got an operating portfolio of about 160 megawatts. All of that is solar. And the development portfolio would include solar and standalone battery storage. Next slide, please. Now I'll hand it over to Brett, and he can talk to you about the little overview about the Empire Solar Project.
Great, thanks, Mike. As Mike said, this is Brett Hastings, and I was really lucky enough to get the opportunity to continue working on the Empire Solar Project, as well as some other projects that are going to continue to be developed by AES in New York. And I've been involved with building renewable energy projects for 15 years and actually live in a wind park in Bliss. And I've been working specifically on the Empire project for over 2 years now. And I'm happy to say that we're all very lucky to have the ability to work with a company like AES, and most notably because AES is motivated not only to develop and design, but also to follow through and build and operate, which is a process that I'm more supportive of because it requires more of a commitment to outreach and building of long-term relationships in the community. We know that not everybody is excited for us to be here as we are, and we completely understand that. It's one of the many reasons why we're here tonight, and it's to help all folks understand that AES is committed to making sure we answer all of your questions and help as many people as possible feel comfortable that the Empire Solar Project will be a beneficial project, not only for the environment, which is really the main reason why we're here, but also for the community, here in Westfield, and where the conditions are very favorable for a project like this. So why don't we sneak over to the project overview? Yeah, so I'm going to go over a couple different points about this project in an overview, and it's a 125 megawatt solar project, and that means when the sun's shining bright, it's going to create 125 megawatts of solar power to be injected onto the grid. And we're also looking at installing 20 megawatts of energy storage, and we're considering this, and we'll make a decision on it prior to submitting our application in the spring. Now, because this was something that we didn't really talk about in our meeting last year, I want to talk briefly about the addition of energy storage to this project. So really, because research and development in the renewable industry has increased immensely, and it's becoming more and more apparent that storage is going to be a major component of these projects moving forward. Because as we all know, renewable energy sources are intermittent by nature. And that said, filling the gaps between cycles of wind and sun have become very important to the stability of our grid. And the world's working to decrease the use of CO2 emitting electricity generators, including peaker plants and so forth. And as a result, we have this new need to fill the gaps. And it's difficult to list all the reasons why we based our storage decision on, but just a few of them. One of the more important reasons, AES has made a huge commitment to storage and has a team that focuses specifically on it. And we're extremely confident that storage can be and will be a very safe and essential piece of this project and other projects in New York, especially considering the goals that we're reaching for under the climate action plans in New York and frankly, all around the country. 20 megawatt unit will take about an acre of space right near the substation, and of course will be installed in compliance with all the local, state, and federal regs. And both economically and electrically, it's way more efficient to have distributed energy storage units attached to the grid rather than, say, one large peaker plant at one transmission input, because you have more instantaneous startup, and it's quite a bit more efficient to build them as well. Of course, we'll have 24/7 monitoring of the units and automatic control of the output if any issues present themselves, and we'll be working directly with the local EMS, fire departments, and so forth with regard to safety plans and emergency response, starting very soon and moving right on through construction and operations. Most of you are aware of the location, the town of Westfield in Chautauqua County. We are going to be connecting onto the National Grid 230 kV South Ripley line, and the actual interconnection is located right within the project footprint. The project's being studied in the current NISO, the New York Independent Systems Operator, there who run the grid, the Clash Year Facility Study. And that study takes about a year, and it helps all of the grid projects understand their impacts and scopes, and allows for an efficient and safe integration onto the grid. Some obviously, environmental benefits to this project. Close to 162,000 metric tons of CO2 emissions are going to be reduced, and it will be able to power approximately more than 20,000 homes when running at full efficiency. So we're expected to be operational by the end of 2023. COD means commercial operations date. Let me switch on to the next page. So I'll go through a project timeline here. The first phase, the 2019 to 2021 development phase, environmental studies, engineering, permitting, that box there. We've been in here for over 2 years, and this is really a quick summary of what we've done so far. Basically, we have looked at the lines around the area, transmission, the laws, and the land, and what we do is preliminarily assess the local transmission substation and systems for adaptability, for capacity. And then we reach out to landowners in the area surrounding the potential interconnection point, as well as have conversations with town leaders, and just assess everyone's interest and or concerns with the project. So we also reviewed the Westfield Town Solar Law to ensure that a project could responsibly be built in the town of Westfield. We had incredibly positive feedback from all those initial reviews, and I'm happy to say that we've been engaged with landowners and town leaders all along the way, and not as much as we would have liked to last year due to COVID, of course, but things are starting to look up on that front. So that's on the development side. On the environmental study side, Rachel's going to touch on all of the studies that we've been through and what we're implementing now, and we'll be performing both pre-application and moving throughout the life of the project. But it's important to note that all these studies are not just one and done. We'll be continuing to assess and monitor our impacts to the environment in an attempt to ensure we continue to improve it. We hire very experienced consultants in the industry, for instance, like TRC and Young Summer. We want to ensure we get quality, unbiased information based on experience. And these guys have had to manage the line between customers like us and the agencies like the DEC and the Army Corps and landowners and stakeholders just for many, many years and over many, many projects. And we're very happy to have the opportunity to partner with them. So engineering and design has been started, and we've got some preliminary layouts for these projects. But as you can see, this just by looking at this timeline, we're in the beginning of this. We're in the preliminary phases. We want to be able to reach out to you folks and share what we have at this point, and notify you guys if there's any changes in the future. We'll be looking to submit our application towards the end of the summer, and starting in construction towards the end of the year 2022, Q4 or quarter 4. That's October, November, December timeframe, and then estimated COD or commercial operations date is end of 2023. Let's see here. Why don't we go to the next slide? And here's a preliminary project layout, and I say that because there's still some more studies that we're working on, even though we've performed many of them. Some of the panel area in the northwest will be reduced based on some topographical surveys that we're doing. But this is a good idea, or a good layout to kind of show you the area of the panels and where things are going to be. Let's see here. The transmission line, as I was talking earlier, runs right through the middle of the project, and that will be in the sort of northwest portion of the project area. And the energy storage unit will be located there, and we'll be backing it away from roads, and in an attempt to reduce visual impacts and help us stay in compliance with sound related regulations as well. Let's see. Vegetation in the area, mostly ag and reverting ag lands, some forested area, but mostly brush and emerging forests. And we'll be calculating more closely what the impacts to prime agricultural lands will be. And that'll be one of the required exhibits within the permit application. And at this point, we don't anticipate there'll be a major impact to prime ag. And that's got a lot to do with how we selected, or one of the reasons why we selected this area. We're staying well away from the gorge on the east and staying up on the top to stay out of the view shed of that gorge itself. And we're also working proactively with the local snowmobile clubs, and Eric will touch on that a little bit later, but we want to ensure that we don't, we don't interrupt that trail system, and we can mitigate any interruptions. Yeah, why don't we move on to the next page? So along with a project this size, there are many economic benefits that come along with this. This is a $190 million capital investment. What that type of an investment means is many other pieces come as part of that. So 11.5 million in estimated tax related and other benefits. We modeled this over the first 20 years, and that will be, Chautauqua County will share in that, Westfield School District, the town of Westfield, and as well as all the special districts within the project area. And it's really important to note that we don't require any additional services. So we don't need any sewer connections. We plow our own access roads. We don't send any kids to school. We handle our own electrical connections, just as a few examples. So this is added tax revenue provided to the community without the associated burdens that typically come as a result of new developments. Also, there will be some host community benefits that we'll be discussing with the community as well. A new one, this is an example of a result of the 94C process. There's an electric utility bill credit whereby $500 per megawatt per year. These credits will be distributed among the residential and utility customers in the town of Westfield for the first 10 years of that project. So that's a total of $625,000 that will be distributed in credits to the local residential utility customers. Along with those benefits, there's also 2 or 3 full-time technical and management positions that will come along. And along with those positions during construction, there's an extremely huge short-term benefit. There's 200 to 250 jobs during construction, and that means all kinds of spending at the local hotels and restaurants and diners and gas stations, hardware stores, coffee shops. There'd be quite a substantial amount of money being spent in the area as a result. So that's just a summary of the economic benefits and the project layout. At this point, I think I'll hand it over to Eric Will, and he'll take over this part.
Thanks, Brett. Hi, everybody. Again, my name is Eric Will. I'm a lifetime resident of Central New York. I live up in the Syracuse area. And like Brett, I've been involved with the Empire Solar Project since its beginning a couple years ago. The project's transition to AES ownership has been a pretty seamless one for us, and hopefully that's true for our landowners and stakeholders too. I'm very comfortable saying this because I have to say the community-oriented culture, which is so important, it really hasn't changed from company to company. AES is very committed to being a good neighbor, and we plan on being fully engaged with Chautauqua County and the town of Westfield for a lot of years to come. We'll always welcome opportunities to interact with property owners, schools, public officials, and community organizations, and be receptive to things like sponsorship and partnership opportunities, as well as giving site tours and presentations. We believe a utility scale solar installation like this can be a real community asset that can be used very effectively to promote clean energy awareness and education. In addition, our public involvement program plan that we filed under Article 10 will continue to be our roadmap for public engagement. That plan in 2020, it resulted in stakeholder interactions, but unfortunately not many were in-person meetings for obvious reasons. But I'm pleased that that's finally begun to change. Just a couple of weeks ago, I spent a couple of days down there and was able to meet a number of you in person, which was great. That to me makes a huge difference. The last point on this slide emphasizes our desire to be especially supportive of economic development and environmental initiatives, plus STEM education. AES is the first renewable energy company in the US actually to join companies like Microsoft, Boeing, Procter & Gamble in Discovery Education STEM Careers Coalition. We're really committed to engaging in these kinds of programs that'll help connect students to STEM careers and offer professional development to their teachers. Next slide, please. Excuse me. A year ago, when the project was still owned by National Grid Renewables, we held our first Empire Solar virtual community meeting. So tonight's our second. Over the last couple of years, we've held a lot of meetings with area landowners, both those participating in the project as well as those who aren't, and will continue to do so. And in addition, we've had communications with the town board and county officials, and we'd really like to thank you very much for your participation tonight. We've had quite a few opportunities to discuss the project with community stakeholders. And yes, we got the right slide, sorry. And you can see a few examples here on this slide. We've reached out, as Brett mentioned, to the Chautauqua Lake Snowmobile Club and let them know of our interest in ensuring that this project doesn't disrupt their ability to enjoy riding through the area. We've had a good conversation with the Westfield Fish and Game Club, actually a neighbor to the project. We've joined the Westfield Barcelona Chamber of Commerce and hope that this affiliation will help us to get to know the local community that much better. Again, we've had an excellent initial conversation with the chief of the Westfield Fire Department, and we'll be reaching out to other first responders in the area to discuss training and emergency response plans. We'll always seek to hire as much local labor as possible and pay prevailing wages. So we'll be talking with some of the local labor organizations. And in fact, we've already discussed this with, it was the New York Laborers Organizing Fund, as well as recently as today, I spoke with the head of the IBEW down there. And there's a lot of interest in working with us. We've already discussed this with I mentioned the Laborers Fund. It's worth mentioning across the state that we've been very impressed with organized labor's commitment to training their members in the various phases of constructing a solar generation facility. There's a lot of core competencies that have to be brought to the table. And I got to say that they're doing an awfully good job of getting ready for this opportunity, not just with our projects, but with many. I'd also mentioned that we've had an introductory call with the Chautauqua County IDA. There will be others. Certainly, there's plenty of other organizations and agencies we'll want to engage with. So for sure, this type of interaction is definitely going to be an ongoing process. Next slide, please. Lastly, we always like to encourage folks to make community engagement a two-way street. We really do welcome your input and urge you to never, ever hesitate to reach out to us. You'll notice on this slide, there's a lot of ways to do that. We have a dedicated New York toll-free number. The project has an email address and a website, and real people you can speak with who hold virtual office hours twice a week at our toll-free number. And on the last slide of this presentation, you'll see my email address and cell phone number as well as Brett's. And we believe in being available, and when we're not, you can count on getting a return call very quickly. Now, to give you a New York State regulatory overview, I'd like to introduce our lead permitting attorney, Jim Moscato. Jim's a partner with the Young Summer Law Firm over in Albany and has a lot of years' experience permitting utility scale renewable energy projects here in New York. Jim?
Thanks, Eric. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. And good evening. My name is, as Eric said, is Jim Moscato. I'm a permitting attorney from the law firm of Young Summer in Albany. I grew up in central New York and have really lived in upstate New York all my life. As Eric said, I'm permitting counsel for Empire Solar and assisting the project through the permitting process. I've been involved in permitting and development for renewable energy projects for almost 20 years now. And tonight I'm here to talk about the state permitting process known as Section 94C. The Empire Solar Project is what's known under the state law as a major renewable energy project and is required to obtain permission from the state to construct and operate a proposed solar project. That permission is sought from the Office of Renewable Energy Siting, or what you'll hear people refer to as ORES. When the project began development, the process was under Article 10 of the Public Service Law. However, recognizing the need to reform the permitting process for renewable energy projects specifically as compared with traditional energy generation projects, and the similarities and potential impacts across classes of projects, the state legislature enacted Section 94C. Section 94C allows projects that were previously proceeding under Article 10 to elect into the Section 94C process. Both Article 10 and Section 94C replace the State Environmental Quality Review Act, or what you would otherwise know as SEQR, and it requires a comprehensive assessment of potential environmental impacts as part of the review process. Rachel Silva is going to go into a bit more detail regarding the studies and information that will be assessed and evaluated as part of the application in a few minutes, as required by the law and the regulations. Under Article 10, Empire commenced the process with the filing of what's known as a Public Involvement Program Plan, or PIP, in February of 2020, which was updated in April of 2020 and will be again updated in the future. The PIP outlines steps and procedures the developer would follow in informing the public about the project and the process for identifying stakeholders. Following the PIP and some transitions of project owners that Mike mentioned earlier, over the next 8 to 10 months, AES has been continuing development of the project, conducting many of the studies, including seasonal specific studies, and has been working on finalizing the design. The Article 10 application would have been the culmination of that effort. However, now that information will be included as part of the 94C application. Can we go to the next slide? As I mentioned, Empire Solar has elected to proceed in the new permitting process, and this was created specifically for renewable energy projects. Under Section 94C, the siting permit is issued by the newly created Office of Renewable Energy Siting, ORES, which is within the New York State Department of State. Permit decisions by ORES are made by the executive director or his or her designee. Regulations to provide additional details on the information that was provided in the original law, Section 94C, were promulgated, starting with draft regulations that were issued for public comment in September of 2020. Hearings were held on a specific piece of the draft regulations, which were the uniform standards and conditions. And ultimately, ORES took comment on all of the regulations until December, and final regulations in the uniform standards and conditions were adopted in March. The hallmark of the Section 94C law is what I mentioned before, the uniform standards and conditions, which, as the name sounds, they recognize the similarity of the potential impacts and standards to minimize those impacts across all renewable energy projects, creating a specific or a uniform set of requirements. The USCs establish the rules of the game up front, and they allow both developers to design their projects in conformance with those standards, which have been promulgated to protect human health and the environment, but also for towns and communities to understand what the standards are in advance of these projects, which in many ways are unique uses in communities that are hosting them. In addition, for projects where there's unique or different circumstances or potential impacts that can't be addressed by the uniform standards, there is the ability for ORES to establish site-specific conditions and what are known as SSCs. And these SSCs, they are either adopted by ORES or they can also be advocated for by parties during the process. The standards reflect extensive work that has been done in the Article 10 proceedings and hearings, including extensive testimony, cross-examination, and briefings that have been reviewed by the state to date and represent stringent sound, setback, and other requirements that must be met by the project. In addition to the USCs, there's a number of pre-construction compliance filings and plans and other details that have to be filed in order to ensure construction, if it's approved, proceeds safely. Next slide, please. This is an overview of the Section 94C process. You'll see the red box, that's the "you are here" indicator, and that's the stage of the process that this project is in at this time. As you saw highlighted on the last slide, part of the process involves pre-application consultation, which we're currently engaged in with state agencies, local agencies, and community members as required by Section 94C. These consultations have been ongoing and will continue until we file the application. The next box is the application submission, which in this case, we anticipate filing in the summer of 2021. Intervenor funding applications would be due 30 days after the application is filed. And there are a number of notification procedures under the regulations to ensure that the community and host municipalities are aware that the application has been filed. Following a 60-day review to determine if the application meets the regulatory requirements by the office, the application is either deemed deficient and requires a supplement, or ORES will deem it complete. And then ORES has 60 days to issue a draft permit. Once ORES issues the draft permit, it will also announce a minimum 60-day public comment period, which will provide the public and host municipality time to submit the municipal statement of compliance, party requests, issue statements, and comments on the project. Following submission of the comments, ORES will determine whether an adjudicatory or evidentiary hearing is necessary, which depends on whether or not substantive or significant comments are raised as issues. ORES must make a decision on the permit within 12 months from the date it is determined to be complete. Following a decision on the permit, the applicant is required to make what are known as compliance filings, which include final design plans and other plans prior to commencing construction. And at that point, again, there's an opportunity for the state and the public and involved parties to comment on plans prior to their review and approval by ORES. And then finally, construction's commenced, and in this case, it's anticipated to be late 2022 or early 2023. Next slide. In making a decision whether to grant the siting permit, similar to Article 10, ORES must consider local laws. And unless the local laws are set aside as unreasonably burdensome, ORES's permit will require the applicant to comply with applicable local laws. Again, similar to Article 10, in considering whether local laws are unreasonably burdensome, ORES must consider the state's Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act targets for the development of renewable energy and the environmental benefits of the project. Municipalities have a number of roles in the process. In addition to the pre-application consultations, the municipalities can submit the statement of compliance with local laws following the issuance of the draft permit, public comments, and ultimately provide ORES its view as to whether or not the local laws, or there are local laws that the host municipality seeks to enforce, and whether the project is designed in conformance with applicable local laws. To assist municipalities in the review of projects, like Article 10, there is a $1,000 per megawatt intervenor fund fee that is paid by the applicant when it files its application, that municipalities can use for attorneys and consultants to assist them in the process. Municipalities are entitled to 75% of the intervenor fund, which for this project would total approximately $125,000. Intervenor funds must be applied for within 30 days of the filing of the application, which again for this project would be likely in the August or September timeframe. Finally, relating to benefits to municipalities, 94C requires a host community benefit, as Brett mentioned earlier. Next slide. This slide provides a list of the 94C application exhibits. And as you can see, 94C is quite comprehensive and requires studies, analysis, and details on many, many topics that are included as part of the application. Next slide. This slide provides an overview of site restoration and decommissioning. One of the requirements of Section 94C is for the applicant to develop a decommissioning plan. And the decommissioning plan outlines how the applicant will decommission and restore the site at the end of the project's useful life. In addition to outlining in detail how the project sponsor would go about decommissioning the project, decommissioning also includes ensuring that the applicant provides financial security to ensure that in the unlikely event that the applicant cannot carry forward the decommissioning at the end of the useful life of the facility, that there is funding set aside on behalf of the municipality to conduct decommissioning. Next slide, please. So I mentioned one of the items to be discussed with the town during the pre-application consultation is compliance with local laws. Solar and energy storage are permitted uses in the town. The town of Westfield has relatively recently enacted zoning provisions addressing large-scale solar projects and include the details listed here on this slide. Those provisions include setbacks, decommissioning, and other provisions. And we're working to ensure that the Empire Solar Project is designed to comply with all existing applicable local laws in the town. There are a few instances where we need to look closely at the requirements. For example, whether the setback applies to participating parcel lot lines and how this impacts the design. But for the most part, the Empire Solar Project is committed to designing the project in conformance with the local laws. Next slide, please. Oh, this is it. Lastly, for my last segment tonight, this is the overview of the intervenor funds. The important information on this slide, which will be made available after tonight's session on the Empire Solar website, is the address for filing for intervenor funds. And we'll have all of that information available to folks so that at that time, it will also be included in the notices that will be sent out for the project, both at the 60-day point prior to the filing of the application, as well as 3 days prior to the filing of the application, so that it's very clear when the intervenor fund applications would be timely. Now I'm going to turn the presentation over to Rachel to provide an overview of the extensive studies and evaluations that go into the permitting application for the project. Rachel?
Thanks, Jim. Good evening. My name is Rachel Silva, and I am with TRC as the Environmental Permitting Project Manager for the Empire Solar Project. And I sit in the West Seneca office, just an hour up the road from the project. To expand upon what Jim mentioned earlier, I'm going to briefly discuss some of the studies and analyses that are required to complete the 94C permitting effort. Some of these field studies have already been initiated or completed, and there will also be more field work occurring throughout the coming year as well. Next slide. During the 2020 field season, TRC completed wetland and stream delineations within the project area. In total, 101 wetlands and 79 streams were identified within the project area. Upon completion of the wetland delineation report, which consolidates all this data, we submitted this report to ORES for review and are also in the process of completing a site visit with ORES's consultant to verify these delineations. As stated here, our goal for this project is to avoid and minimize impacts to these important resources. And the next slide, I'll show you a map of some of the delineated resources within the project area. Next slide. You know, Brett previously had shown a slide earlier with a preliminary project layout. And I just wanted to mention here that, you know, the importance of these studies, not only just required by 94C, but, you know, for good reason, they do in fact help fine tune the layout. And when many variables and components are considered, that helps shape the layout. So that's wetlands and streams obviously are one of those variables. And the previous slide that showed the larger, zoomed out version of the project location. We're well aware of the proximity, to Lake Erie and the importance of these resources. Our delineation is currently in the process of being vetted by the state, as I mentioned, and will be in consultation throughout the 94C process with DEC and the state to avoid impacts as practicable. Next slide. In addition to the wetland and stream delineations, you may have seen our field staff in the early summer hours, very early, and or late evening winter hours conducting some of the breeding bird survey and winter raptor surveys. TRC conducted breeding bird surveys between May and July 2020 in accordance with the New York State DEC protocol issued for these surveys. In addition, TRC completed winter raptor surveys at the project during the 2019, 2020, and then into the 2020-2021 winter field season. Next slide, please. We will be completing viewshed analyses for the project, which will include photo simulations demonstrating what the project will look like in the landscape. Both viewshed analyses and photo simulations will be included in the visual impact assessment, which is another component of what's included in the application. This will also include a glare analysis. In addition to visual analyses, TRC will complete a landscaping plan for the project to support visual screening and mitigation. Generally speaking, we, in the landscaping plan, we utilize a mix of coniferous and deciduous species. Of course, with paying close attention to what is native and does succeed in the area. These next slides will show first, actually, if you could go to the next slide, thanks. This is just an example of a preliminary viewshed map. And next slide, please. These are just some preliminary photo viewpoint locations alongside some existing visual resources. And the next slide, we have a representative viewpoint from Sherman Westfield Road that looks like it's facing southwest. So then this photo would then be in those simulations, could potentially be utilized to show if there was a view of the project from this location, what it would look like. Next slide. Moving on to sound studies. Solar farm noise impacts are studied as well as part of the permitting process. However, did want to mention that noise created by solar project is minimal. The inverters can be heard when you are standing very close to them. And this is demonstrated pretty well in the next slide. You can see here that, by comparison, if you take a look at that red outlined box, a solar facility sound heard from a residence is really just above a whisper at 3 feet. So in the interest of time, I know I didn't get into each of the studies, but we are completing, to support the permitting of this project. But if there are any other studies that folks have questions about or would like to discuss, I guess that opens it up to the next slide with the Q&A.
Thanks so much, Rachel. So we are going into the Q&A section right now. Please feel free to put any questions you have in the chat. We have one question so far. What are the plans to reduce the disruption to forested areas? This appears to be the headwaters to Lake Erie, and trees hold many benefits to the watershed.
Yeah, this is a great question, Neely. Thanks. In the interest of being a responsible, renewable project developer, we work to avoid environmental impacts to the maximum extent practicable. I mean, that's how we design our projects. That's why when we develop a project, we work to have enough land, more land than we need to actually, fit the project in. And as far as the forested acreages, there's a few things that I'll touch on before I'll ask Rachel to talk about some other environmental reasons for avoiding. But some of on the map, we showed some areas in the northwest that there's some impacts there to some forested acres. The map shows more panels than we actually need to make our projected limit of 125 megawatts. And we have some more studies that are coming in. We do a flyover, a LiDAR, it's a laser guided topographic study. And that has to be done after the snow. And I'm a Western New Yorker, live in Bliss, New York, and I know how the snow in Chautauqua County is. So it took a little while to shed the snow. They did the flyover. We're going to get some topographical information, and we will be changing that layout a little bit based on topography, and that will impact the wooded areas. That will reduce the amount of forested areas that we operate in. But so that's from the layout side. Rachel, do you have anything you want to add at all from Chair C's perspective?
I think you did a great job, Brett. I guess from the perspective of, I'll just kind of point back to, I think I covered this a little bit with the information of the wetland and streams and the delineation efforts that TRC has conducted to date. So obviously, we are doing an inventory of those resources. We're paying very close attention to forested areas. There's some, obviously we're analyzing and taking note on habitat and forested areas and those wetland and streams. So, consolidating all of that information into that wetland delineation report is really kind of that first idea of what the area looks like, and kind of the first conversation starter with DEC, so that, we have that conversation to we're addressing what we know to be out there as valuable resources, and trying to use that information to basically adjust and accommodate the layout accordingly.
Okay, thank you, Rachel and Brett. We've had a few more questions come in, and one is what I meant to include in the beginning of this meeting is the number of people who are participating. And we had up to 30, now we're down to about 25 community members who've joined. So thank you all so much. And the next question is, please describe the battery storage facility. Please include in this description a summary of the hazardous substances used or stored in the facility and the quantities of such materials.
So the battery storage facility will be located, takes up approximately an acre, and it will be composed or comprised of cells of batteries, as well as all the the safety features. We will be integrating a lot of this information into the application as well, and we'll have a little bit more information for you as we solidify this piece. This is still a proposed addition to our project, and we won't be making a complete decision on this until we actually file our application, which will be, like I said, later in the summer. But we can follow up with some more information for you with our Q&A session that we post to the website. Neely, you're going to talk about that later?
I mentioned it earlier in the presentation. Okay. We will be posting the presentation slides and the recording of the presentation by mid next week is our goal. And the Q&A, we will get that as soon as we finish that document. So
perfect. Yeah, thank you. So we'll add some more answers to that question as well.
Okay. Next question. Does AES have any other similar solar projects currently operating in New York State? And if so, where are those projects located?
Brett, you want me to take that?
Yeah, I was going to say, Mike, that sounds good.
Yeah, so it's a good question. We do not have any projects of this size operating. You'll notice that no projects of this size are currently operating in New York State. We do have a 20 megawatt project that's in Riverhead in Long Island in Suffolk County that I think is the second or third largest solar project in New York. We also have a total of about 40 megawatts of in total of operating megawatts in Long Island. We also, as I mentioned on some of the earlier slides, I think in total in New York, we've got about 160 megawatts of that's generally made up of smaller distributed solar projects, and those are throughout New York State. So nothing of this scale, but we certainly have a lot of experience building solar projects in New York, and we've been able to build one of the currently larger solar projects in Long Island that's operating in New York State.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Next question. Is there any plan to increase the amount of storage considering the size of the project?
Good question. At this point, there is not. As I mentioned before, we're in somewhat of a preliminary state as to figuring out exactly what company we're actually going to utilize for our battery storage, and the size of the project we decided on 19.99 megawatts, but there really isn't a plan to increase the size of that for sure. Mike, do you have anything else you want to touch on with regard to battery storage?
No, I think you've covered it there, but the battery storage is it's not going to be larger than what we've currently planned.
Thank you, Brett and Mike. Next question. We've heard nothing or very little from our town board. Perhaps this is because of your change in ownership. What communications have you had with the Westfield town officials since May 2020?
That's another good question. So, based on COVID, we haven't had the ability to have too many personal reach outs. Eric Will has been engaged with the town board, the planning board. We've had an actual meeting with the zoning official just last week, and we've had a few meetings earlier this year. When we had our last communication with them back in May, we let them know that we were going into a sort of an engineering and development phase where an environmental study phase, which I talked a little bit about earlier. And so that was really just kind of a phase where we were we had let the town know what we were looking to do with this project, and then we let them know that we were going to be doing environmental studies and other geotechnicals and surveys, all kinds of different studies. And so I guess, for that period, we were a bit radio silent based on COVID, based on all the studies that were going on. There really wasn't any more information to really transfer to the town, but we were there to answer any questions from the town if they asked us.
Yeah, and Brett, I would just add that there is a project website, and that project website has been carried over. Obviously, National Grid had a project website, and we've carried over that. And that's obviously been operating throughout that period of time for any updates to the project as well. So even if we're not having these type of meetings, there's potentially project updates. And obviously, as Eric mentioned earlier, we're available on a number of different avenues on either phone, email, website, et cetera, to reach out if anyone has any questions.
Yeah, good point, Mike. We're trying to be as absolutely open and available as possible.
All right, thank you both. Next question. Are any BAT studies required for this project?
Rachel, why don't you take that one?
Happy to. So as part of the 94C process, and to address potential rare, threatened, and endangered species in proximity to the project area, we've looked at publicly available resource databases. And then in addition to that, 94C has us consulting with DEC pretty early on in the process. And during those consultations, we receive, we provide data to DEC, you know, in terms of what we found in the field, and we also receive data from their databases of known occurrences of R-teeny species. So with respect to bats, you know, during project planning, we'll continue consulting with DEC, and as necessary, you know, we'll adhere to tree clearing window restrictions when the time comes for construction. But in the meantime, our biologists will note, you know, any indication of roost trees and things of that nature, but there are no specific bat studies that are planned at this time. But we'll, of course, in consultation, just want to mention, in consultation with DEC, we'll be, you know, addressing what is necessary to avoid those species.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.
Next question. Oh, Brett, were you going to say something? Did I?
Nope.
No. Okay. Next question. What sort of noise is emitted? Is there noise from the battery storage facility?
So, you know, a project like this does emit some sounds, but, you know, nowhere near some of the other renewable energy projects. There's inverters and solar inverters that convert the DC to AC. There's also, you know, similar equipment in the battery storage facility. There's fans, cooling fans, things to that effect. But all the sounds that these pieces of equipment emit will be studied, very detailed, and ensure that we're in compliance with all the sound regulations, both from the town and ORES, and will be, as those studies become available, they will be included in the application.
Okay. Thank you, Brett. Next question. Where is the proposed battery storage facility located in your plan?
Yeah, so that's going to be located next to the substation, which will be sort of in the northwest corner by the 230 kV line. It'll be right in that section up there, right next to the substation where it interconnects to the transmission line.
Thank you very much.
I want to add, sorry, Neely, I just want to add, I think on the battery side, I think it's obviously a pretty new technology in New York, and we understand that. I want to just reiterate some of the things that Brett was saying about, you know, AES is actually has a joint venture with a company called Fluence, which is the largest battery installer in the world. We're also looking at potential battery storage down in New York City. And for example, working with the New York City Fire Department, as you can imagine, there's some pretty strict safety standards. Because of our experience installing batteries and where we're looking at, we have very good connections with the battery suppliers and making sure that we've got sort of state-of-the-art safety requirements in place. So I just wanted to reiterate that. And also with the location, basically the battery storage is going to be looked at as part of the electrical infrastructure. It'll be attached to the project substation. It'll take up 1 to 2 acres of land, and it'll sort of be part of that existing electrical infrastructure, and will be treated as such.
Thank you, Mike. Next question. Is there any federal funding associated with this project?
Mike, do you want to continue on with that one?
Yeah, so I think, yeah, I mean, I guess in some way, no, in some ways, yes. So all renewable projects, all renewable solar projects, there's something called an investment tax credit. So certain percentage of capital costs of the project, you get to receive a tax credit on your tax return, and in many times, which is what we would plan to do here, usually that tax credit is monetized through something called tax equity. It's a way to raise capital in order to finance the project. There are no other federal funding or subsidies that have to do with this project in particular. And the only sort of federal funding that would apply in this case would be related to the federal tax returns.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Mike. So we are about at time, but we have a few more questions around battery storage, and we will stay on to answer those questions. If you, and if you still have questions, please share them with us. We are, again, want to be open and accessible to the community.
I think, Neely, there's one on the overhead lines. I don't know if Brett wants to take that one.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead, Neely. You can ask it if you want.
Okay. Will any new overhead electrical lines be constructed in support of this project? Will existing lines or poles increase in height? If so, please generally describe the height and location of the lines.
Yeah, so the layout or the building of this project has several different types of electrical connections and lines. So all of the panels are connected, the series of panels and inverters are connected together with an underground collection line. And then that line, all of those lines essentially go to what they call our collection substation. And that's right next to the interconnection point. So all of those lines from all the panels will feed in. And I mean, 99.9% of those lines wind up underground. If for some reason, geologically or environmentally, we're required by a regulation to go above ground, we might do so, but it's not what we like to do. It's not what we plan to do. It's not good for O&M. It's better to have lines underground. But when you get to the substation, there's lines that we're going to be interconnecting to that are at a certain height. So coming out of the substation, our plug, if you will, is going to be up in the air. I can't tell you exactly how many feet that transmission line is up in the air, but if you're in the area, you can take a look, take a drive by. You'll be able to see where they're at. And so we'll come out of the substation with a dead end structure and run lines over and essentially tap onto the existing lines at that height. So hopefully that answers your question. In the project area, no, our goal is to have all the collection lines underground. And when you get to the substation and we raise our voltage to meet that grid voltage, at that point we will be overhead, and it will just be a short run to the actual transmission line.
Okay, thanks, Brett. So the next question, isn't there someone on the team who can describe the general classes of hazardous substances associated with battery storage? I find it surprising that no one can specifically answer this question.
Yeah, so we don't have our battery storage team on the call tonight, but I absolutely have no issues reaching out to you and getting some information to you specifically. We'll post that information on our website, but we don't want to answer questions that we don't have answers to on this call. Just to answer the question. So we don't have any problem reaching out to you directly. We'll also populate the answers to that question after we have our conversation as well, and hopefully that will suffice.
Yeah, Brett, I just want to add, I think it's a good question. We have not purchased the batteries we'll be using, so we don't want to be premature because different batteries have different chemical makeups. So we can't answer that question yet because we haven't purchased the batteries. I can confirm the batteries will be lithium-ion batteries, which is generally standard accepted technology for battery storage, and that all the chemicals impact, the potential sound, environmental impact of both batteries and solar will obviously be included in the permit application, which obviously will be fully transparent and available for the public to review.
Yeah. If anything, we want to make sure everybody feels that we're being completely transparent. We'll be glad to answer all these questions. We just want to get the right subject matter experts involved.
Thank you, Brett and Mike. The next question, is there a possibility for the village electric lines to be buried in areas that are overlapping? They're overlapping your buried lines.
Yep, I think I understand exactly, what's being asked. So as we run our collection lines underground from, inverter to inverter and over to the collection substation, I think the question is, asking, hey, if we come across any other underground lines, whether it be telephone or electric or gas lines, yes, there is a chance that we could be overlapping those lines. So what we would be doing is working to get crossing agreements, and we have a team of folks that will work on that. And those crossing agreements will certainly take into account different engineering tactics that we'll have to take to safely make those crosses. And we'll work with, in this instance, if we do have to cross a village electric line, we'll work with the village electric company to operate in compliance with their standards.
Okay, thank you, Brett. So that is all the questions. Those are all the questions that have come in. Again, please don't hesitate to reach out to us through our phone number. If you call us outside office hours, we try to return the call as soon as possible, within a few hours, a day at the most. Here's our developer's contact information, and just please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you all so much for participating. We can conclude tonight's meeting. And again, please fill out the survey and let us know how we did. Have a lovely evening, everyone.
Thanks very much.